What's up, everybody? It's Chad. I'm back again with another episode of Ask Chad Grassy Logic. I'm here today on a cool episode because I have someone special right next to me today. I have Mayor Pro Temp Bencomo. I was going to say your whole name, but Mayor Pro Temp Bencomo. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me again.
Of course. It's been since the first season that we had you on, and now a lot's changed. I mean, you got reelected since then. Yeah. Congratulations. And, you're still here with us, on the city council, and Mayor Pro Temp, of course, as well. And we'll explain what that means if some of you who don't know. But thank you so much for joining me. And it's going to be great to get some updates from you and everything. I think we have some really good conversations to talk about. I know the first time we talked, we did. So I'm looking forward to this one. So for the people who don't know who you are, could you please give an introduction to the listeners and everything?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be back. As Chad said, my name is Johanna Bencomo. I serve as the Mayor Pro Tem of the city of Las Cruces. I'm the elected city councilor for District 4. This is my second term, and I'm in the second year of my second term.
Nice. Yeah. Well, we're glad to keep you around.
Thank you.
She was one of the yes votes when we were voting for 24-hour shops here in Las Cruces. And at the time, I think us and maybe one other place were the only ones doing it, or we may have been the only ones, I think, doing it at the time. So we really appreciate that. And to be honest, we really had no issues from it. And I see more people benefit from it than not. And to be honest, there's not that many. Not that many. There's like maybe 3. Now. And, pretty consistently, we always hear that the 24-hour shops are really safe, that they're highly utilized, that there's generally very little reports to police or whatever about any issues that they experience. Yeah. And, to be honest, that was one of the concerns some people had.
Yeah.
But when it came along, it was the opposite. Actually, neighbors that were next to dispensaries thanked them. Said, thank you. There's no crime now.
We're glad there's people here and activity here 24/7.
Yeah, exactly. It's, they're not coming around because there's too many vehicles around and, too many cameras these days too. So, glad to have you around. Hopefully we can keep you around. But for those who may have been confused of her title, could you maybe explain what Mayor Pro Temp means?
Thank you. Yes. So I get elected as a city councilor, right? So in Las Cruces, we have 6 city council districts and 1 mayor. Mm-hmm. The mayor runs at large, meaning the entire city gets to vote for them. The 6 city council districts, you run where you live and only those people can vote for you. Once you get elected, the city council votes on a mayor pro tem. So I got elected by my colleagues on the city council to essentially serve as the vice mayor. So I step in to fill in the duties of the mayor when the mayor is not available.
Nice. Yeah. Congratulations on that. You essentially got voted in twice.
And what's really cool about this one is that you get, elected by your colleagues and that your colleagues have that trust in you. And actually the mayor was the one that nominated me to be his mayor pro tem. So, awesome. I carry that with a lot of gratitude and honor. Nice.
Yeah. And we actually have a new mayor in New Mexico, in Las Cruces, New Mexico.
Yes.
He's newer, I guess. He's been around for almost 2 years now.
We got elected we're on the same election cycle.
Okay, cool.
So in 2023, he is our brand new mayor, and we haven't had a new mayor for many years. So it was really historic and exciting for him.
Yeah, definitely. So congrats to him. He's been doing his thing. I've been pretty supportive of the cannabis thing as well too. That was my concern because I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
I didn't hear anything, so I was like, well, I guess I'm just gonna find out.
He's maybe you can have him on. I mean, his background is he was in the fire department for a really long time. He was a fire chief. And I think he's someone that just wants to see the city grow. And I think he's supportive of the things that make that happen.
Definitely. Yeah, that's great. And that's kind of what I'm seeing too. And we'll talk more about some of the stuff that's, going on with the city because I really, really want to hear about. But here's a question that I don't think I know. If not, I forgot. Yeah. What made you get into politics in the first place?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So, I mean, honestly, very long story short, I'm an immigrant in the United States. I came to the United States with my family when I was 8 years old. Mm-hmm. And I think that experience really shaped a lot of who I am today and honestly, the kind of career that I wanted to have. And I wanted to go into social justice. My whole life, I've just been that kind of person. And I got my master's in social work from New Mexico State University. And that led me to find community organizing. And so I was doing a lot of community organizing for immigrant rights, workers' rights, the border community. And through that, I discovered how often policies that are created, the people who are impacted by a lot of policies are never at the decision-making table. Yeah. And, as someone who lives in this community, loves this community, I felt like voices like mine needed to be represented. In 2018, I was encouraged to apply for a program called Emerge. Emerge America exists all over the country, but Emerge New Mexico specifically trains Democratic women to run for office. And it really left like a little spark in me and in a way that I wanted to advocate for my community. And in 2019, when the city councilor who was my city councilor then decided not to seek re-election, I was asked many, many times to run, including by a friend of mine who was on the city council then, Gabe Vasquez, who is now our congressman, took me out to Bosque, had a couple beers, and said, "You really need to run." And through a lot of support, I decided to run. And I ran my campaign like a community organizer. I wanted to talk to people and invite people into the process. And I'm just a deeply relational person. Like, I just love people, and I won, and I won again in 2023.
Yeah. Congrats. I did vote for you. Well, no, I couldn't vote for you. I had to vote for Becky, but I did vote for Becky.
You did, which is good. Yes. And you were really supportive. And I think you were able to get a lot of people who are cannabis users or supportive of the cannabis industry who live in District 4 to vote for me. And that's really appreciated.
No problem. And we appreciate it too. Like I said, the whole city council, especially you, I think you're on one of my clips, when you guys were voting, you're like, "No, I'm ready, Mayor." So I have you on one of my clips actually. So if you guys want to watch that, it's a couple of years back when we voted in and everything. I think that was right after the show. I think after you're on the show, I think it was right after, I'm not sure. But yeah, that was, you guys have been very, very supportive. Of course, I can't speak for the whole city government, but the city council themselves has been very supportive of us. And, we appreciate that. And, I try to tell people, I don't want to vote against myself. So if someone's pro-cannabis, they're going to help my industry, by all means. So, and of course, you've done other great things too on top of that. So I really appreciate it. You're not like a one issue kind of person. So,
I dive in. I dive in. And, something I said really early on, once New Mexico, passed this law, I was of the belief that like we can't be 1 foot in, 1 foot out, right? And so if we're gonna deregulate it, then let's do that. Let's like help this industry thrive, and we're not going to do that if we still have a leash on it. So
and that's great that you say that, and hopefully in the future, state-wise and nationally wise, we can deregulate the industry a little bit, because there's a little bit too much bureaucracy in this.
No, there's definitely.
Coming from someone who was in the military.
Government, exactly.
Coming from someone in the military, and I'm telling you, there's too much bureaucracy. You need to change it.
No, exactly.
So you understand too, coming from that side. There's always going to be bureaucracy stuff, but we can get rid of wasting some trees.
Absolutely.
We can get rid of some of the bulk that's there just out of fear. So hopefully down the road we can do that. Of course, there's other issues that we need to tackle first. Of course, enforcement's one. Here in Cruces, we're not different from anyone else. We've had our own issues. I ran into legal dispensaries myself, but it was tied up between the CCD and the local police departments not knowing who had the jurisdiction. So this more solidifies who has jurisdiction. And hopefully we can get some issues fixed here in New Mexico, because I really think that that's one of our hugest issues is the enforcement thing, or the lack of, I guess I would say. So I think once that's tackled, we'll see a change. But we're already seeing a change too. I'm sure you've noticed the less dispensaries in town. Especially when you go down Solano. And to be honest, as sad as it is when someone shuts down, that's actually a good thing for the industry. We were, oversaturated. We're starting to get that tackled, but now, of course, other issues pop up. And I noticed that, okay, at least this issue is kind of fixing itself. Those who are going to be here are going to be here.
I think, and the reality is that we live in a society, in capitalism. And sort of capitalism, whether you're like, yay, capitalism, or boo, capitalism. Like, the reality is that that's the environment that businesses are having to operate in. Whether you're Walgreens having to compete with CVS, or whether you're a local dispensary shop having to compete with some bigger some bigger franchised ones or whatever, right? Like, that's just the reality that we live in, and the market is what it is, and you have to be a competitor, and you have to, market yourself and build the customer base and all of that. Like, those are all things that all businesses are sort of struggling with, right? And having to reflect on, which is also a good thing, right? That like the industry is having to operate like all other retail industry. I think that's ultimately a positive thing. And so, but I want to make sure that I think in the ways that we grow, that like community development at the city, that the fire department, whatever, that they're that they understand how to support the industry and not hinder it. I think those are some of the growing edges for sure.
Yeah, and that's something that has been echoed by some of the people in the industry too here in town, is that there's certain parts. That's why I said, I know the city council supports us. I'm just not sure about the rest of the government.
Yeah.
Of course, there's different parts of the city government, just like any that are differ. And of course, you have people in there that may or may not like cannabis, and it happens. Yeah. And so, that's one thing that I've noticed is it's not as bad here, but you do run into that, and hopefully that'll change in time.
Yeah,
because people just have to see this as a regular business. Like the consumption lounges. I'm huge on consumption. I'm huge on consumption lounges. And, like certain people, when they tell me, oh, it smells like weed everywhere. And I tell them these days, like, you want to know what fixes that? They're like, what? I'm like, a consumption lounge?
Yeah, exactly.
A consumption lounge fixes that, because now instead of that person going out in the front yard or whatever, or being in public, they have somewhere public they can go to that is allowing that. And that really mitigates that issue,
But issue. Like you said earlier, so many of these narratives are fear driven, and not to like get too in the weeds or whatever, but I hear something similar around housing. Oh, there's too many homeless people. Okay, great, let's build more affordable housing. Oh, affordable, and then people also hate affordable housing. And so it's kind of the same thing, right? Like, you don't want to smell weed out in the streets or in parks or whatever. It's like, people want to have safe spaces to recreate, and so let's build them.
Yeah, to socialize, because cannabis users like to socialize too.
Let's build the plate. Let's build what we need to address the problem. But then people have issues with the problem too. And so I think it's really fear-based. And sometimes I sort of take it, my approach is to kind of call it for what it is.
No, I'm the same way. It is what it is, and I call it for what it is.
Exactly.
Some people like that, some people don't.
Some people don't.
Yeah, some people really, really don't. And I both know that, firsthand and everything. And speaking of like the city stuff and that, let's talk about the Realize Las Cruces zoning thing. I'm excited for this one actually. I lived in Germany and other places, around the nation and the world. Yeah. And, zoning is different everywhere you go.
Everywhere.
But when I lived in Germany, I was able to walk to the little gas station nearby. I was able to walk to a little restaurant and get some pommes frites and a beer. Pommes frites is French fries in German. I was able to go to all these little niche little places, even a little pizza spot, like right next to it. And, it was all within my neighborhood, my little village. It was called Wolfskalen was the name of the village. Very small, but I was able to do that still, even at that small scale. And I feel this is something that we could do. But, for those who don't know what's going on, could you maybe explain what Realize Las Cruces is?
So Realize Las Cruces is the sort of package of policies around land use and zoning. Woo, local government. No, but honestly, I think zoning is deeply political. We've known this through decades in history in this country around how cities have been built, how highways are built, where poverty is concentrated. Like, zoning is deeply, deeply political. Besides that, though, Las Cruces has not updated our land use and zoning code since 2001.
Oh, wow.
So for those of you who are from here, or even if you're not and you've just lived here a long time, you've seen how the city has grown and changed. And the needs that we had in 2001 are vastly different than the needs that we have in 2025. And so 4 years ago, we decided that this was a need that we needed. And so then business owners or people who own land, who own land in Las Cruces, are having to come to the Planning and Zoning Commission, to Las Cruces City Council, because they want to redevelop their agricultural zoned land into something new, housing or whatever. And they have to go through all of these hoops. And so we just wanted to revitalize and upgrade all of these plots of land all over the city that needed to be remodernized. And 4 years ago, we brought in a consultant that was going to help us do this, because we knew it was going to take due diligence. It was going to take a lot of research, best practices, a lot of community involvement. And it's taken 4 years, a very democratic process that created an advisory committee made up of developers, realtors, advocate organizations, residents who love this work, right? Experts. And we brought them in to revamp this entire policy. And actually it used to be way more pages. Now it's only 420 something pages. But it's because it's deeply technical. And but we did this entire process and finally got it passed in February, and through some other things that maybe we can get to or not, but it's officially the law of the land. And it does, impact cannabis dispensaries and retail cannabis, because it impacts all retail, not just the cannabis, right? As to where like in what parts of the city you can put in a dispensary shop and those kinds of things. And actually for cannabis, it probably didn't change a whole lot. Like a lot of those regulations were already set in place and they were already really good in Las Cruces, I think. And so they probably didn't change a lot. But essentially, like you were talking about the town in Germany, one of the core values of Realize was to create more mixed use neighborhoods, right? Neighborhoods that aren't just single family suburban neighborhoods that actually create a lot of, they're not very sustainable, right? Because they are car centric. We then have to do a lot more infrastructure, not just for roads, for the fire department, for police, for transportation, public transportation, all utilities, right? And so we want to make sure that now in the core of the city, it is a lot easier for developers to say, yeah, I'm going to build multifamily housing because we are in a housing crisis. I'm going to build what we call the missing middle housing for young people who are like, I want to buy a house. I cannot afford one of those houses off 70. That's $340,000. But I could afford maybe a townhouse closer to downtown where I want to live. Yeah. Right now, before Realize, there wasn't an incentive for developers to want to build that kind of housing. Yeah. With Realize, there is, and that's what we want to encourage. And I'm really excited about Realize. I'm really excited that it's finally the law, and I think it's going to ensure that for the next 20, 25 years, that the city grows in really beautiful ways.
Yeah, I agree. And that's something that I've noticed too, is like this whole suburbia takeover thing of like our whole, suburban areas. And they're so far from retail areas sometimes that you have to drive 10, 15 minutes just to go to Lowe's or Home Depot. And even here in town, I live, mostly centralized. I still have to drive a few minutes, several minutes away to get to these things when I could just probably walk to it. Now, don't get me wrong. If I'm picking up lumber, I'm obviously going to take my truck. Yeah. But if I need to go get, let's say, oil, or I need to get a screw or a tool, and if there's something nearby my house and I can just walk there, that's great. You know, like I just walk a couple of minutes, go say hi. And to be honest, you get to know your neighbors and your neighborhood a little bit better that way.
You really can.
Exactly. Once this came out and I really dug into it, I'm nerdy and I'm probably autistic, and
people should do that though, because otherwise you get easily manipulated by misinformation.
Yeah, exactly. And I was like, well, let me look. And I looked up studies and everything, and then it looks like majority of the time this increases property value and it also increases public safety.
Correct.
From what I've seen myself, study wise, and I've looked both ways. But a lot of the concerns that I saw was people were thinking that something was being forced on them. The projects were going to be right next to them. There's going to be a bunch of trailer parks, and all this. The world's going to end and the sky's falling.
Correct.
When I really don't see it that way. I see this as a very progressive way to update Las Cruces to, becoming a bigger city. Because if we go the same route we're going now, we're just going to end up with this weird urban sprawl all over the place in the outskirts, which is already happening. And to be honest, if you go to somewhere like Red Hawk in town, there's not a Walmart, there's not a store out there, there's nothing for those people to get. They have to drive in town. Yeah. And that's how a lot of wrecks happen. Yep. The more cars on the road, the more wrecks.
And you could argue and say, well, those people chose to live there and that's what they wanted. Or that's the option you had.
Yeah, exactly.
That's also just the option you had. And so you want to live in a good neighborhood, in a safe neighborhood, in a neighborhood that has sidewalks and complete streets. And those are those neighborhoods, good parks. The reality is that the entire city deserves that, right? And so that's what this puts into place. But it also gives property owners in some of these sort of more suburban neighborhoods the option to say, I could do a little cafe here. Like I could build a little cafe that serves pastries in the morning and coffee, and that people could walk in these neighborhoods and create more walkability and connection, or not, right? Yeah. Like that could also still not happen.
Yeah, exactly.
But it gives people the option that it really could. And it just, again, diversifies housing options for people, right? And again, back to the fear, this idea that like, oh, apartment complexes is where poor people are going to live, is going to be next to my neighborhood, or mobile home. Like we have to really reflect on like, where do those thoughts come from? Like, why do we think apartment complexes are bad?
Yeah.
Right? Like, why do we think mobile homes parks are bad? There are incredible mobile home parks in Las Cruces where people are able to afford to purchase like their own home, and that's what they are able to do. And this gives the ability for people to just live in neighborhoods that the kind of neighborhoods that they want to, and also give property owners options for what they want to do with their property.
Yeah, and it gives them the options to like build a casita, right?
Build a casita, like an AUD, right? Like an attachment to your home, because we are now living, we want to live, whether it's I want to rent it out so that I could pay my mortgage off faster, or I have a family member who I would love to live in my backyard, right? And still have their independence, and like multi-generational families in southern New Mexico is a big thing. And there's just so many really beautiful things. And so I want to thank you for diving into, and because it is very complicated and technical, but that's why it can't go on the ballot. Like, can you imagine something like that? When you go to the ballot, you should make an informed consent, right? Yes. Like you should be informed about whether it's a person or a policy. You should be able to study what you're going to vote for. It would be impossible for people to do this in a responsible way at the ballot box, but that's what you elected us for, right?
Yeah,
to
exactly.
do the work, right? It was a 4-year process, and we put, people in place who could help us make the right decisions, and I really think we did.
Yeah, I mean, we're representative democracy.
Correct.
And so that's the way this process works. And like you said, it's been the last 4 years.
4 years.
Yeah, and usually when you vote on something, you don't get the 4 years to figure it out.
Absolutely.
And I remember when this plan came out, and I saw it, and I was like, hell yeah. I had other things to deal with, but I was like, this is obviously isn't something I'm against. I think this is something great. So I've been seeing it as time goes on, and once you guys passed it, I was like, heck yeah. But I saw people wanted to vote for it. I'm like, we didn't get to vote for cannabis. I was like, we didn't get to vote for
cannabis. We didn't get to vote for whether we should criminalize unhoused people for having shopping carts. That's not how this works. There are very key things that the voters need to vote on. The GRT increase.
Yes.
That went to the voters. That's important.
Yeah.
When we do go bonds, right? When we're asking you to use public dollars to go out and bond for bigger projects, that you should have a vote in that, right? Otherwise, that is representative democracy, right? That's why we elect members of Congress to go vote on laws in Washington, D.C. that will affect our life. I would love to vote on some of the things that are happening right now, but guess what? That's just not how it works, because we have a government structure that allows us for you to vote your values on a person that's going to go represent you. And that's what we're doing. Yeah. And obviously, realize pass on a 6-1 vote, meaning of the 7 of us, 6 city councilors and the mayor, only one of those people voted against it.
Yeah. And, that's actually really good to hear, because that means it was that popular.
Correct.
I spoke with my vote when I voted for, my representative from the city.
That's right.
Because I knew she was going to implement this and go on
with your
it.
values.
Exactly, my values. And that's how I voted. Yeah. Because I knew that they were going to do that. And to be honest, this is a pro-capitalistic kind of approach, it really is though. It's promoting more business in places that haven't been.
It promotes more. I think it's just like, you're right, probably. But I also think it's really like human connection, right? It's about business. It's about small businesses being able to open in places where maybe they didn't before, where they could afford. It's about connectivity. It's about walkability, sustainability, all of the things that will just make us better neighbors and a better community.
I think so. That's a good point that you put that. It is like a pro-community thing. It's getting us back to the roots when I was a kid, and we knew all the neighbors and stuff like that.
Yes.
Of course, I'm from Alamogordo originally, so I don't know any of my neighbors here. But we knew like all the neighbors. They've been there for years and this and that, and it gets back to that. And I really like that. I want to be able to take my dog to a little coffee shop or something, get a tea. And
in a good park.
Yeah, good park, let her run around, and, it sounds great. And that's really the area I want to live in. If I wanted to live in the wilderness away from everybody, I would have done that.
Correct.
I would have moved to Ruidoso, somewhere remote, and I would be chopping.
You can live out in the county if you want. Yeah, absolutely. I think some of these ideas that people are like, well, but if you bought this house and then someone builds an apartment complex in front and you can't see the mountains anymore. The reality is that you don't own the view of the mountains, and people who rent, people who either don't want to buy a house or cannot afford to and want to live in safe, quality apartment complexes also deserve a right to live in neighborhoods and not be concentrated where we think people who rent should live, right? Yeah. People who rent should be able to live where there is places to rent. Yeah. And we should have places to rent all over the city. Exactly. And to my final question on this matter, and I'm sure a bunch of you are wondering this too, does this mean dispensaries can be anywhere in the city? No. Okay. Where exactly can they be? No. So, oh gosh, this is going to get real wonky. Okay. So realize the new code has sort of 3 designations for neighborhoods called NH1, NH2, and NH3. NH1 is very much primarily like residential areas. NH3 has a little bit more density where maybe you could have like the little coffee shop or whatever and those kinds of things. NH3 is a lot more residential with urban, right?
Yeah.
So actually the neighborhood we're in right now, right? There's housing right here. There's Solano's commercial, right? Like this is very NH3. Dispensaries can go in NH3 neighborhoods with a special use permit still. So that's nothing new, right? Dispensaries have been used to applying for a special use permit depending on where they were. Or you don't need special use permit in commercial districts.
Got it.
Like you don't have to jump through any hoops. Any retail, including cannabis, can go in a commercial zone.
Okay. And here's a personal question I just thought of, and I thought of this weeks ago and I forgot to ask people, and you're here now, so I might as well. What about manufacturing and growing? Does that...
Those didn't really change.
Okay. Yeah. Those are about the same.
Those are about the same as they were.
Okay, cool. Yeah, because I've had a couple people ask me, I'm like, that I don't know.
Yeah, no, but those are, it's honestly, it's very cool. If you go to, I think it's still realizelascruces.gov. Don't quote me on that. Just look up, Google Realize Las Cruces. You will see the website. There's a couple of things you can do on there. Under documents, you'll be able to see the entire document and literally just like Control F and put in dispensary.
Yeah.
And there's a really cool graph that shows literally all of the like uses, all of the retail, a car wash, a dispensary, childcare, whatever. And it'll tell you exactly where they're allowed. And like manufacturing, all of that will be the same thing. And then the other thing that you could find on that website is a map, an interactive map where you could put in your address and it'll tell you which one of those 3 neighborhood designations you live in and what could be allowed in like where you live.
Nice.
Yes, it is a very front-facing process. So don't let the haters fool you.
Yeah. You know, I've been seeing them too, and I was like, it was pretty transparent on my end. The whole time they were begging for our input.
Correct.
You're like literally begging. Yeah, literally like, please come and tell us what you want.
Yep.
You know, and
I said this on the other day at the city council, right? Like, not to sound cheesy, but politics is not a spectator sport, right? Like if you were invited to participate, right? Yeah. Because then when something happens, you can't say, well, nobody asked me when you probably were asked, right? And so, and I know that like I say land use development code and maybe your eyes roll to the back of your head. You're like, oh my God, what is this thing? That sounds so boring. It's really not. Like local government is my favorite kind of government because at the national level, we can so easily turn off the noise, the rhetoric, the hate, the negativity. It's so divisive. At the local level, unfortunately, it's starting to get more that way. But that aside, there are so many things at the very local level that impact you directly. The condition of your road, your parks, your public infrastructure, like public transit, all of these things, like you could have a direct impact in. And trust me, people like me, city councilors, we want to hear from you. Yeah,
100%. And I tell people this all the time, you know, your local government affects you directly more than any presidential election or any presidential person. Like your city government, you need to be very active in. And it's sad because most local governments are very, very low turnouts. Yeah. You know, it's like very low. I don't know if you know the last turnout here because I'm not too sure of the numbers, but I did vote.
I don't have them specifically with me, but I do remember back, oh gosh, this was several cycles ago. One city councilor won by 12 votes. And actually this last race for District 2, the current city councilor who won by 50 votes.
Holy crap. And I was telling everybody on that, I said, city elections are very infamously known for low turnouts. So you can lose these very easily. Yeah. You can literally, your vote, you and your family, say you guys go vote, you could be the deciding factor.
You could be the turning point for someone.
Exactly. Correct. You know, and you sitting at home saying it doesn't matter. City voting literally does matter. You know, matters. You can say whatever you want about the presidential election,
electoral
the federal,
college, whatever.
Yeah, whatever. But when it comes to city voting, holy crap, it's important. And I'm glad that you brought that up because that's something that I preached to people before. I'm like, you got to go vote. You know, like I try to vote as much as I can. You know, every city election that has gone on here, I went and voted.
Every year is election year.
There we go. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. As unfortunate as it sounds, because then you get all those stupid,
Yes, it's true.
stupid
You're
ads.
like, oh, brother. No, it's true. But every year is election year. And so obviously we have the big presidential years and we have the midterms, right? Governors, those kinds of things. But on years like this year, what are we, 2025? It's a city election year and it will probably be low turnout. And it's sad, but, you should get involved. There are school board elections and city council elections this year.
Nice. Well, make sure y'all go out and vote and everything. I know I will be.
Yeah.
Of course, I can't vote for you, not my district, but I don't even think you're up for re-election this year, right? It's the next election cycle.
My district is up in 2027.
Okay.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah,
So,
something like that.
Yeah, something like that in that area. So we're looking forward to the voting and everything. We'll see what's going on. I'm sure there's other issues that are sometimes on the ballot that we do get to vote on, like this past year through the state. Through the other election, it was veteran tax, like housing tax.
Yep.
I don't pay house tax because of that.
Yeah.
That's something that we did get to vote on. And actually, I think it passed pretty much unanimously from everyone. And everyone I talked to was like, yeah, I'm saying yes to that.
Yeah, so things like taxes, things like constitutional amendments in New Mexico, those things will always come to the voters.
Yeah, 100%. So, but other than that, we have our representatives, and I appreciate you being our representative.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for that conversation. We're going to go on to the next couple topics. We're going to go on with this real fast. And the next one, it actually still does have to do with the city council and yourself, of course, and everything. But this one actually has to deal with the border checks, because you guys were actually very supportive of us as well when it came to like the border issue. And if you guys don't know, if you're just tuning into my show, I've been covering this. And Gino's looking at me like, here we go again, beating this dead horse. We've been dealing with cannabis seizures at the border checks for like the last year. The border checks have been there since I remember as a kid, but they were leaving the cannabis industry alone until about last year. Now it's kind of getting worse, but the city of Las Cruces has actually been very supportive. Now there's not much you guys can do because it's federal, but just having your support, that goes a long way. You know what I mean? Like the fact that the city supports us still is huge. And some of you might be confused. So the border checkpoints, they're federally controlled. So federal law trumps state law, and our cannabis legalization is a state law. And so there's really nothing the city or the state can really do when it comes to those. And it's unfortunate because there's a lot of businesses that are struggling or trying to get their product to other places of the state and haven't even left the state. And they're getting harassed, seized, and, employees are getting detained, vehicles are getting seized, and the whole 9 yards. So I just wanted to talk to y'all about that. And also thank you for just being supportive.
Yeah. Well, this isn't hard for me because I've had beef with the Border Patrol checkpoints forever.
Me too.
As a brown person who lives in the border. But honestly, Border Patrol checkpoints impact our daily lives for so many reasons, right? Yeah. And so if you're not from a border community or even a border state, you might not know that there is a federally designated border zone, which is 100 miles inland of the borderline. That includes coasts, the southern border, the northern border, the sides, Florida, basically all of Florida is in the border.
All of Hawaii.
Yeah, and so it's 100 miles in, right? Within, which if you think about it, it's like 2/3 of the population, right? Yeah. Some of the biggest cities are within this border zone. Within this border zone, the federal government has said that agencies like Border Patrol, Customs and Border Protection can operate, frankly, with a lot of impunity. They can essentially do whatever they want. 25 miles within that 100 mile zone, no warrants. Like it is up for grabs, right? And so that means goods and people, right? Yeah. So my experience for a long time being an organizer that did immigrant rights work was around people and how this impacted our mixed status families, right? If you live in a family with maybe an undocumented parent and U.S. citizen children, it impacts the way you can access healthcare, right? If you think about it in Las Cruces. So in Las Cruces, obviously to the south is the southern border. But in any direction, right, east, north, or west, you will find one of these checkpoints. And communities like Hatch, who, let's say you're a mixed status person, there's no hospital in Hatch. You would have to come to Las Cruces or go all the way to Albuquerque, right? And so these impact our lives pretty significantly. And then if you're someone like me or like Chad, who are brown, I get stopped, honestly, pretty consistently. I get stopped and asked, is that your vehicle? Or is it your company car?
Oh, yeah.
Where were you born? Are you
I
by
get asked,
yourself?
what are you hauling?
Yep. Can
Yeah.
you roll down your back windows,
Yeah.
right? And you're maybe like, those aren't invasive questions, but honestly, they kind of are, right? Because we are in the United States of America, where these kinds of questions, any other place, you would have to have a warrant or a pretty reasonable suspicion for something like that. Anyway, with now cannabis being the law of the land in New Mexico, that now impacts goods just as much, and it has impacted a lot of small businesses and people as well. And obviously it's really unfortunate, right? And I think that it feels really powerless to be able to say, this is how we want to live in our community. These are the choices that we're making for how to live in New Mexico and in Las Cruces, and for the federal government to say, So I think people have lost a lot of money. People maybe have faced federal charges, which is really awful, because the core of the cannabis legislation was one of those values, was to reduce how it's criminalized a lot of people, right? And so it's really unfortunate. I could talk about this forever. Again, I have serious beef with Border Patrol checkpoints, but it is unfortunate that the only thing I can do is speak out against it.
Yeah, and like I said, that's more than enough of what we could expect and really want from you guys. I mean, if you guys could change the world, of course we'd love that.
Someone put us in charge.
I know, right? Yeah, please do. Voting. Go vote. And it's unfortunate that, we have to wait for the federal government to finally catch up. And it's sad that we have to wait this long. I mean, majority of the country lives in and I saw the statistic, I think it was like 1 in 5 or 1 in 10 American lives in a city that's next to a dispensary. I was like, that's pretty high. Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah.
And so you're telling me that most people in America are close enough to be at a dispensary, and that is wild. So until the federal government changes something, we're just going to be dealing with this. And it's unfortunate because, I've dealt with these my whole life. They've questioned me my whole life. Yep. I'm a veteran, for God's sakes. And I still get questioned all the time. Like just recently, I was driving back from El Paso, and one asked me, what are we hauling today? And I was confused by the question, because they're really just supposed to ask you your legal status, your status. And the first question he asked was, what are we hauling? And I'm like, my bags? And he was like, okay, we'll see. And I was like, okay. And I drove off. I was like,
and then I think some of the worst parts about that is that kind of depends on the mood of that agent that day too, right? Like there's no streamlined policy for how we treat people. It really is sometimes the mood.
Yeah, it is. And I was going to ask you too. So what is your advice to other city representatives, county representatives in areas that find themselves close to the border like this? What would be your advice on support? I mean, I know there's not much, but a little bit goes a long way in the situation.
Absolutely. I mean, first and foremost is get informed, right? Really think about what are the realities of a border community, and what are people experiencing and struggling with. And then I would say build relationship with your local Border Patrol chiefs or whatever. I wouldn't be taking my own advice if I were honest with you. I think for me, it's obviously such a much more personal issue as an immigrant myself. Yeah. I'm a citizen now, but it still impacts us. And so I don't know. I mean, for other folks, I would just say, stay informed.
Yeah. And that's the best we can do. And I kind of figured, and sometimes that's all they need to hear. Is stay informed. All right, I'll keep doing what I'm doing.
And connected to our members of Congress and our senators, right? I think sometimes our voices do carry some weight around hey, Congressman Vasquez, this is happening, right? To be able to get flow information to our federal representatives.
Yeah. And I think we've reached out to him, and I think he did try to introduce something last year.
Yeah.
And of course it's Congress, so who knows where it's at. It gets lost in the mess over in Congress. So he is very supportive, and that's great to hear. And I think all of our congressional representatives are supportive, to be honest. I think so for the most part, which is great to hear. Because, we sat here in New Mexico. We had a anti-cannabis governor, Martinez, for 8 years. And that was hard, especially being a patient and everything. And then, representatives were iffy about it back then. And now we have full support, and it's so much better. Yeah. And, I want to thank you guys again for just having the support for the industry and us, has been just phenomenal, and we appreciate that. I just wanted to talk about it more, and I've mentioned it many times that the city council has been supportive, and this is one of the members of city council that has been supportive, and I wanted y'all to hear it from her mouth, how supportive you are, and also maybe get some tips from people that maybe you had, or I have no clue, or who knows, I'm not in that position, so you guys are, and it's unfortunate that we're going through this because California and Arizona aren't dealing with this issue.
Yeah, so it's interesting because Las Cruces as a border community is actually, if you look at the southern border, a lot of these kinds of checkpoints, for example, in San Diego, they exist before you get to the big urban area. So they exist, but they exist before San Diego. Tucson, they exist, but they exist before Tucson. Houston, they exist, but they exist before Houston. And don't get me wrong, like the RGV and all those. Texas, you know what? Let's not talk about Texas. It's a whole other animal. But we are in a Las Cruces. This region is very different than other regions in the border zone.
Yeah, I mean, we're the only borderplex in the nation, I believe, and so that speaks volumes for how different it is here. And I think Highway 54 going from El Paso to Alamogordo is one of the most highly trafficked roads in the whole
goods,
nation.
Especially, right?
Yeah, exactly. And if you look at a map too, if say you took New Mexico out, let's say for some reason New Mexico stayed Mexico, and you know the way the roads are set up, you have to go through New Mexico to get to California. You have to go through New Mexico to get to Arizona, to get to these other bigger states. If that was the case and we didn't have New Mexico as a state, you'd have to go around. You'd have to go up, you'd have to go through Colorado, and then you'd have to go back down, and it would take a lot longer. So we have a lot of traffic coming through here. And so I guess I could see why, because being from Alamogordo, they always have police on Highway 54 going from Alamogordo to Chilarosa. It's always stacked with it. It's because of the drug smuggling, I guess they claim.
Correct.
That happens
it's all, honestly, to me, as someone who is also a political nerd, like my brain functions like that meme with the guy in the red strings everywhere. And I try not to be a conspiracy theorist, and this isn't, right? Sometimes when I talk about it, it sounds like it, but I think it's deeply tied together, right? Like, so you were like, well, I don't even know when they've been there. They've been there my whole life. Honestly, they've been there. The creation of really Border Patrol and ICE and the Department of Homeland Security as we know it now was created after 9/11. Right. After 9/11, it was created and changed the way that this country regulated the flow of people, right? Not the flow of goods, the flow of people. But then when you start thinking about what kinds of goods are also regulated in the way that a lot of people are, cannabis is one of them. Why is that, you ask, right? And so I think it's deeply tied to, honestly, the very racist policies that are tied to immigration policies as well. And to me, those are deeply interconnected.
Yeah, I mean, and it couldn't be a conspiracy because we dealt with that on the cannabis side for many, many years.
Yeah, who are disproportionately impacted by arrests,
Black and brown people. Yeah, and you know that you look at the statistics and it shows.
Yes. Here we go with our string.
Yeah, the strings are starting now. Yeah, and like it's unfortunate because that's the statistics and that's the numbers that came out with it. And so we have experience with it already, and it's unfortunate that now they're kind of meeting each other in the middle, and it kind of sucks because we think, we're this legal business entity, and then you get through the border check, you're like, no, I'm not, son of a bitch. You got people with their personally owned vehicles getting seized, and you know, I think we're over $1 million of product that's been seized, and that's money that got taken away from the city. That's money that got taken away from families, and you know, because if a business owner loses money, he can't pay his workers.
And let's be real, this is not about safety.
No, it's not.
This is about control.
Yeah, it is, because this is a state control. I mean, we're so over. I just talked about overregulation. Right? We need to deregulate.
Bureaucracy.
Yeah. There's so much bureaucracy in this that you can't tell me that this is not a safe thing that we're doing. You know, it's just like we're just trying to enforce the law. I was like, well, why aren't you enforcing the law in Arizona and California then, like you are here? You know, like it's unfortunate that every direction I go, I hit a border check.
And you know what? The majority of drugs like fentanyl come through checkpoints.
Yeah. And I try to tell people this. I'm like, they only catch a certain percentage of things
very tiny
and a very small percentage. And when I was military intel, I realized that you can't have freedom and safety, like high-end safety security, because you lose freedom, and you can't have either or. It has to be a balance of the two. You know, if you have too much security, you have no freedom. If you have too much freedom, you have no security. So you have to have like a little balance here, or you have to figure out which one you want.
And it is possible, right? Because someone could say like, I think it's absolutely possible to do that. I think we just have to believe that people make the best choices for themselves when it comes to many choices, right? Again, so many things are about control. If we want to talk about Texas like that, let's talk about it, right?
We are actually in this next conversation.
Okay,
so we're going to talk about Texas for a minute.
Perfect. And so, but I do feel like it really is possible. And we have to be able to trust each other that, that just doesn't exist.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
and
But it
it's
could,
unfortunate.
but it can.
It could. Most of this is possible. It's up to us.
Yep.
At the end of the day, what we want and what we really want to do with this, and hopefully we make the right decisions.
Yeah.
So I thank you for this conversation and everything on the
Yes,
Border
I know,
Patrol
I
thing.
love
And,
it.
yeah, me too. I love having you on the show because we get to talk about all this cool nerdy stuff and trip people out. So we're gonna get to our last conversation. Thank you so
Awesome.
much on that last one. We're gonna talk about Texas, like you said. And the reason why I'm gonna talk about Texas is because they literally last night at the time of the recording passed the hemp ban. They're going to, ban THCA. They're going to ban the Delta 8 stuff, all that stuff. And New Mexico tried to go that route too, but it failed within the last hour. However, we weren't going to ban THCA because that would have caused a lot of confusion because all THC starts out at THCA. Because what THCA is, it's the non-psychoactive version of it. And what happens is when you heat THCA up, it becomes psychoactive. So when you smoke it is when, or just heat up in general, but normally when you smoke it, that's when it becomes psychoactive. But you could eat the flower and you wouldn't get high because it's not activated.
Oh, interesting.
So in Texas, they had THCA, the one that's not psychoactive, all these lower, hemp products, and of course the Delta 8 stuff that was, synthesized from CBD. Now Texas has been fighting, and actually Dan Patrick held an educational bill hostage. He said, I'm going to hold this bill hostage unless you guys ban hemp. And I was like, you're holding education hostage for like something that's not even that big of a deal that just needs regulation. Like, that's a little ridiculous. So last night they passed it. I think it was like 99 to like 20 or 40 something. It was ridiculous how much has passed. And to be honest, it was the whole time it's been rooted in lies and, assumptions and, these parents who are coming in saying my son did this and that, and I'm like, well, why is your kid getting a hold of these products? Why don't you know what's going on with your kid?
Yeah.
Like, why are you blaming everyone else versus yourself? When I got caught smoking weed when I was 14, my dad blamed himself, and then he turned into Sergeant Lozano, and my life sucked for 2 weeks. He was in the Air Force
For 2 weeks.
for 2 weeks, because I learned my lesson after that. I was like, nope. Because even after that, he didn't trust me for a while, which is understandable. Those
are the consequences, right?
That was the consequence of what I did. I was 14. I shouldn't have been smoking weed.
Yeah.
Like I did, but I got caught. And so that was my punishment and everything. And I had to, there's actually a stop sign in front of my parents' house. I had to move it 6 feet because it was like, he wanted to put it right on the property line and versus it being on his line. And this cop even stopped by while we are doing it because we live across the street from the high school, or I did. And this cop stops. He goes, hey, what are you guys doing? Because he saw me digging, pulling out this sign. And my dad goes, caught him smoking weed. And he goes, carry on. And he just drives off.
Yeah. Small towns.
Yeah, small towns. Yeah. He was like, cool, carry on.
Yeah.
So, there's that. In Texas, they're going backwards. They're staying in that mindset. You know what I mean? Like, don't get me wrong. Kids should not be using cannabis. But at the same time, we need to look at how they're getting the cannabis, where they're getting the cannabis. And when I hear the arguments, I'm like, if they got it from a smoke shop, a gas station, or any of these other places, they're supposed to card people.
Yeah.
So if they're not carding for something simple as hemp, what else are they not carding people for? So why are we just blaming hemp when it's the operators of these establishments that are the ones causing the issue?
Yeah.
Now, don't get me wrong, it's highly unregulated, the hemp industry. But the states have the option to regulate it more if they'd like, and that's all they really have to do. And that's what the advocates in Texas were really pushing for. They were pushing for, please just regulate this. Just regulate it. We're not telling you to legalize weed, but just let us keep this industry that we have. And it's $1 billion industry in Texas. They have the biggest cannabis or hemp industry in the whole nation right now. And they have until September. Yeah. What a huge loss, right?
Maybe a gain for us.
Yeah, and I made a story last night and I said, that's a big win for New Mexico. Yes, like we get to continue and probably be even better than what we were because of this, but at what cost? And I always feel for patients when they lose access, because when I was a patient here in New Mexico, I was a very rural patient. I had 2 dispensary choices that weren't even in my own city. So I had that option. But even the dispensaries I didn't like, when we started getting more, when one was shut down, I would feel for the patients because they just lost access. And, I'm happy for us in New Mexico. Like, this is a win for us. But I also know there's going to be veterans in Texas and also people that need this in Texas that found relief that are going to have to either come here, risk all that legal BS with this.
You can afford it.
And if you can afford it, or they're just going to have to go back to the street. They still have the medical cannabis program in Texas, the Texas Teacup program, but it's more of a hemp program. There's no smokables. It's very limited. There's only like 2 dispensaries, 3 dispensaries in the whole state or something, maybe 4. And it's very monopolized.
Home with the free.
Exactly. Right. Yeah, I know. Right. I was like, dang, that sounds more free where I'm at than over there. So
many things.
It is. And I've been talking to the advocates in Texas and everything the past, day or so, and they're very defeated. They're very tired, but they're not giving up. And I hope they don't.
Good.
I hope they continue on. And even if this, even if the governor signs this, because he has the option to veto it, of course, now. But even if he signs this, I still think they should keep trying, and not give up, because that's what we did here in New Mexico.
Up.
Yeah. And this fight never stops.
I know it's hard, but don't give up. Yeah.
It is 100%. So, that I hope New Mexico doesn't follow in the same footsteps as Texas of banning. We tried this past legislative session, and I keep telling people this. I was like, it makes no sense for a couple of reasons. And when I get asked why, I was like, one, I can order it online and have it shipped to my house. It's federally legal. Two, I now have to convince a cop that I have a Schedule 1 federally illegal substance that is legal in my state and not a federally legal unscheduled substance that is now illegal in my state. So now we get into this whole, okay, am I going to be targeted again? Is this going to be another brown people getting arrested kind of thing again, and fears of all that coming back? And that's what I kept trying to tell the legislature, but it kept falling on deaf ears. It kept hearing this.
They tried to do that this year?
Yeah. It actually only failed because it started in the House and then went to the Senate and there was an amendment. So it had to go back to the House. And within that time, it moved. So it failed in the Senate. They introduced like mirrored bills in both houses, in both of the House and the Senate. It failed in the Senate because one of the committee members said that, well, we can order this online. Like, how are you guys going to enforce this? And they really didn't have an answer. So it got voted down. And I was like, oh, thank God. But then they introduced the House version, and the House version moved quick. And it only had one committee, I believe, in each part of the House and the Senate. And so before it had two. And it didn't, on the second time, it didn't go to the Senate committee that it failed in, the first time, for obvious reasons. So it made it all the way through, got to the Senate floor, but they had an amendment.
To ban, not regulate.
This is to ban, full on ban, make it illegal to even possess. Yeah, hemp. Like
New Mexico.
Yeah, in New Mexico, yeah.
Sorry, I wasn't keeping track of that.
Oh, you had other stuff to deal with. Yeah, don't worry. I was keeping track. And don't get me wrong, like these products, they're synthesized from CBD. And what it is, they take CBD and they put it through a chemical process and it turns into something psychoactive. Now, I'm not a big fan of those products, but there are people who do find relief with these products because they like to call it infamously diet weed because it's not as intense. They don't get the anxieties. Yeah, I know it is. And I've tried it myself before just to see. And it is. It's like diet weed. It's like a very low THC weed and you don't get the anxiety and all that good stuff. And some people really enjoyed that. And now these people are going to have to either figure out a product on the legal side, which they're not. They're going to just get it online, or their plug, who now just orders it online and gets it shipped to his house, is going to have them come to his house and he's going to sell it to them. So we're going to create another black market on top of criminalizing people again for the same damn plant. Yeah. And I'm glad it didn't pass, but we do need to regulate
advocacy and to advocacy on how to sort of educate those members of the legislature on everything you're saying, and you're just educating me right now, and advocate for then what, right? So it's not just no, it's the no and here's an alternative.
Yeah, exactly. They could have gone that route, and it's going to be up to the hemp industry now to get with a legislator to maybe get a hemp-backed or a hemp industry-backed bill going on in the legislature, because that's the only route we're going to get that fixed. Because if not, they're going to introduce another bill next year to ban it, and that one most likely will pass unless we convince them otherwise.
Unless you do that work.
It's hard.
Yeah, it is hard.
And you know that
but
too.
But it's worth it.
Yes, 100%. So Texas unfortunately banned hemp products and everything come September. I believe all these shops and everything have to shut down, because I was in Austin in March, and I went to the legislature over there and met with all these advocates, and I got to see the businesses, how booming it was. And man, it was cool to see, but and no one had an issue with anything. We were at a bar, right? And we were just smoking regular weed at a bar outside on the patio, and no one cared at all. And I was like, this is wild. If I did this in New Mexico, it would be a huge problem. Me smoking weed at a restaurant like this, especially a bar. I was like, and no one was acting stupid. Nothing dumb happened. I was most of the people that were smoking weed weren't even drinking alcohol. So, we were just kind of hanging out, and I was like, this is great. I was like, this is kind of cool. But now I'm seeing this. I need to go back maybe next year after this ban and see how it looks, and how different it is, because they had little consumption lounges too, where you can go in, buy your hemp products and smoke it there and hang out and have a good time. It was fun. But unfortunately that's not the case. And The Texas legislature pushed their way to get this banned, and not too sure why. When you have the El Paso police chief telling the community that they can't arrest their way out of this problem with the drinking, and so now we're just adding more reasons for people to drink versus giving them an alternative. So,
well, not to get back to my red strings, but the reality, so not to get also too political, but I'm going to,
of course,
you got me here. Honestly, though, when I look at Texas, Texas is banning hemp. Texas is banning access to abortion and reproductive justice. Texas is banning the existence of trans people. Texas is banning the existence of immigrants. Like these are all deeply connected, and they're all about control. Yeah. And I think it's important that if you are someone who lives in Texas, that you start to recognize that like your struggles are all tied to each other, right? And that we have a lot more in common than not. And organizing and coming together to fight for our freedoms, for our rights, for our health and our safety in many ways. Like it would be much more powerful if we did it together. And I know that sounds like woo-woo, but it's true. Honestly, I feel like that's how we fight back against these kinds of really oppressive policies.
Yeah, I agree.
And I feel for people in Texas. I do.
I do too. And after I found out that it passed, like my heart broke for them because I know exactly what they're feeling. And I was watching their videos, and you could hear it in their voices. Some of them did like, bro, I need a minute, and I'll call you when I feel better. And I'm like, by all means, brother. So I get it, and it sucks because these are real people, real Americans. Like they may be from Texas. We give Texans shit all the time. We're back and forth.
Totally.
But at the end of the day, they're still Americans, and we still care about them. And like they deserve legal cannabis just as much as you and I. Yep. And that I don't know if you use cannabis now or not, but
I don't.
I was like, I never asked that. Now I did. Unpurposely. But it's one of those things where I hope some good change happens eventually in Texas. And unfortunately, that's going to have to happen when you vote. When they go vote, doesn't matter party, whatever. If as long as they're progressive
go
in
on
what
your
you
values.
want. Yes, go on your values, not the color of the party or the animal of the party, whatever.
Yes.
We get to this red versus blue thing, then it's just Crips versus Bloods, and it's just that thing all over again.
Yeah, no, vote your values. Don't vote against your self-interest.
Yeah, exactly. And I tell people that all the time in the cannabis industry. Stop shooting yourselves in the foot. Vote for someone who's going to benefit your industry that you're in, making you money versus just going off of some political idea that you have, At the end of the day, that political idea isn't going to pay your bills, especially if you're in the cannabis industry. So but that's everything I have for this week and everything. Thank you so much again.
That was fun.
It was great. And I'm so glad to have you on again for an update.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. And we'll try to have you on again sometime soon, maybe next season or something. Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And thank you everybody for tuning in. I'll get back again for another episode of Ask Chad Grassy Logic. And we're out this week, but don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, whatever you got to do to stay in the know. All right. Shoots.